Welcome to Saturday. This is another featuring true crime discernment with Shawn Carter on Saturday. I'm your host, Colleen. And tonight we're searching for justice. And specifically, we're talking about Casey Anthony and the death of her daughter, Kaylee. Shawn, how are you today?
Doing great, doing great. Doing some moving around here in the office and got my foot to hurting a little bit. So if you see me squirming over here in the corner, it's okay. I'll be good. So
Okay. All right. Well, I know that the Casey Kaylee Anthony story is old, but it's come up again as of December of
Mhm.
2022. So last month, there's more stuff out there. So I thought it would be relevant to talk about it, and from the true crime discernment and also the justice perspective, searching for true justice. And so we're going to get into some of the details. I'm sure that most of our listeners know about the case. If you don't, we're going to go through kind of who is Casey, who are her parents, the timeline of events from back then, and then talk a little bit more about currently what the conversation is in social media and that kind of thing. So, Shawn, are you ready to get in, or is there anything you want to say before we start?
Well, I'm ready. I'm just glad to be here. I think this case, in my opinion, is very important to look at for several reasons. We're going to talk about the justice issue and discernment issues, but I also think it's important to kind of be careful, and I think that's what we're going to do tonight. We always say this. We're not passing judgment on anybody or taking judgment away from anybody. And I think it's important to just realize that as we look at these cases, we need to look at the spiritual side of this as well, not just a ritual side or not just the crime side, but look at all the spiritual components that come together. And that's one of the reasons why we do the show. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it. So,
Well, I agree. And I think that to understand Casey, I think we need to understand maybe a little bit about our parents. I have listened to at least a dozen hours of documentary podcasts, stories, people digging into who have a lot more time on their hands, maybe to dig into some of the details of not only Casey, but her parents and her family. And all of that does play a role in who a person becomes. And so I do think it's important to mention, at least here at the beginning, who her parents are and kind of what their roots are. And we won't go into all of the details, mostly because I did not investigate them. I'm not a PI. I don't have access to all of the information, but I can kind of read between the lines of some of the things perhaps, and just maybe we can come up with our own opinion. And that's what this is. This is going to be our opinion. This is not, this will be an allegedly conversation. This is not making accusations towards anybody, but just kind of maybe sifting through and discerning what may have led up to Casey being who Casey is, and the way the events unfolded for Kaylee. So let's start with mom and dad. We'll start first with George. George Anthony was born September 5th, 1951 in Niles, Ohio, which I'm going to say in the research I did, I saw several different articles, Wikipedia stuff. Her mom and her dad's birth towns are interchangeable. I'm not sure which is which, so I just went with the more consistent. So Niles, Ohio is more consistently attributed to George, where Cindy Plessy, I think is how you say her name, was born June 5th, 1958. And they are saying she's originally from Warren, Ohio. She is a 1976 graduate of Warren G. Harding High School, which is in Warren, Ohio. So between the two of them, they both were born and raised in Ohio. In June of 1972, when George was 20, he married Terry Rosenberger. And then during that first marriage, when he was 22 in 1974, he joined the Trumbull County Sheriff's Department as a deputy. Says in a lot of the research that George Anthony was reportedly a homicide detective. Sometimes it just says that he was a deputy. I'm sure he had multiple jobs within the sheriff's department during his time there for 10 years, but he did quit law enforcement at the age of 33 in 1985 in Ohio. During his law enforcement career, when Terry and George were married, they divorced kind of at the end of that in 1980, but then 12 months later, in March of 1981, George married Cindy. So at some point in there. It was unclear to me. I've heard it reported that they knew each other while he was still married to Terry. So I don't know if that played a role in their divorce or not, but it was exactly 12 months later, almost to the day, that Cindy and George were married. And at the time, Cindy was working as a nurse in Ohio. And then in 1987, a couple of years after George left law enforcement, he dabbled in politics by running unsuccessfully for the county clerk of courts position. And that's according to the Warren Tribune in Ohio. So George and Cindy went on to have two children, Lee Anthony and Casey Anthony, both of which were born in Ohio. And prior to the family's move to, they were born in Ohio prior to the family moving in 1989 to Orlando, Florida. Once in Orlando, Cindy continued working as a nurse, and George worked as, among other things, a security guard. However, it's been widely reported that Cindy was the primary source of income for the Anthony family, and George was often out of work. So Katie put the picture of George and Cindy. That's actually a picture from the trial later on. That's not obviously their early years of marriage, but that's really mostly what you can find out there. I'm sure if I were to dig, I could find, family stuff from earlier, but that's what's available. So Casey, as we said, was born in Warren, Ohio. She was born in 1986 on March 19th. She attended Colonial High School in Orlando, but did not graduate. She ended, according to her mother, a half a credit short of getting her diploma. So she went all the way through her senior year and was 1/2 credit short. So she allowed her parents to throw her a graduation party, invite all the family, invite them to the graduation ceremony, in which she would not be walking or receiving a diploma. Somehow didn't let them know that she wasn't going to be graduating. So, well, I don't have all the full details regarding the deceptions of the deception pattern from Casey's young life. By the time you get to be 18 years old, if you can cover something like, I'm not going to graduate and I'm letting you put all this money and time and resources into having a graduation party for me, it seems pretty clear to me that Casey had a history of being deceptive and getting away with it, at least with her parents. And to put something out there in such a public way like that, to me, seems a little brazen at 18, 19 years old. So, Katie, if you don't mind showing the high school picture, this is what she looked like in high school. This is not her senior picture. I'm not sure what year this is, but, close to the end of high school. Shawn, what are your thoughts about those details so far?
Well, we'll probably talk about the parents a little bit later on, but I think just thinking about what you just said about those last details, not graduating with just a half a credit to go. I mean, I don't know, even back then, I think they probably would have worked with you. So I don't know exactly why you're not going to finish that diploma. What was going on? Was there some mental break already transpiring and the family knew that? I mean, to me, there's something strange. And I'm not trying to say I would force my kids to get that diploma, but I think any parent would sit down and say, hey, you're going to get this diploma because you're only, a half a credit short. Let's get that other one. I don't care if you go to college or not, you can go straight to work, but still. Yeah. So it's a little odd that close to that. Also, I think during that time, I would wonder, and if I may have not called it, but did you say that the parents knew that she wasn't getting that diploma, or was she fooling them?
It sounds like, based on what I uncovered and what I've heard other podcasters talking about, that they claim to be unaware that she wasn't going to graduate. I saw somewhere in there it was reported that she dropped out of high school in her last semester to start working at a Hard Rock Cafe, and that her parents were unaware of that, which seems like, I mean, I was involved in my kids' high school activities and their grades all the way through, and so I can't imagine getting away with that when I was in high school. I know that my school was on it, especially, you've got a guidance counselor and various people who have a stake in you graduating, and, you're part of their statistics. They want you to graduate. Everyone wants you to just get through, and especially being so close. Of course, that's her mom reporting that it was a half a credit shy. So I'm not really sure what the school would say if you were to call and check. Right. But it does sound by all accounts, like they were not aware that she was not going to be walking in the ceremony. And they found out the day of that she would not be getting a diploma.
I think it kind of shows that there's already some rebellion taking place here on some level. Not, I mean, not just the lying, but deception for the high school, deception probably for the Hard Rock Cafe kind of stuff too.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's move on. So I want to credit Tim Ott, who is a writer for biography.com. He wrote an article that I'm pulling a lot of my information from because he did a really good timeline. And also Wikipedia has some information. I pulled some and sort of mesh that all together. There's going to be some things I didn't actually write in my timeline that I just remember we'll probably talk about as we go. And I know, Shawn, you have some recollections of things that you've known about the case too. So we'll just kind of talk about it, whether I've recorded it here or not. We'll just stop every so often in the timeline and discuss. So in 2008, the world was captivated by the bizarre behavior displayed by Casey Anthony. She was then 22 years old and a single mother. And it was revealed that she had spun a web of lies to cover up for the disappearance of her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee, that summer. The Facebook photos of her partying around town and the dearth of emotion in interviews fueling the charges of first-degree murder before Kaylee's body was discovered later that year. However, there would be no closure for those outraged by a mother's neglect of her child, as Casey escaped conviction in 2011, while the questions of who killed her young daughter and why were never really resolved. So going back to August 9th of 2005, Kaylee Marie Anthony was born to then 19-year-old Casey. So she was born after Casey's repeated denials to family members that she was even pregnant.
Mhm.
Although she suggests possible partners, including her then fiance, Jesse Grund, and another young man who supposedly died in a car accident that year, the identity of Kaylee's father was never publicly released. So in some of the podcast stuff I've listened to, this repeatedly denying that she was pregnant, there's one account where there was a family barbecue and she was well into her second trimester, possibly even the beginning of her third trimester, definitely looked pregnant. She's not a large girl, not a lot of space to hide a baby, but people were asking her parents if she was pregnant and they were saying, no, she says she's not pregnant. I know she's getting a little chunky, but she denied her pregnancy right up until the very last minute. And then still, as of now, 2023, there is no evidence of who the father is. There were several genetic, paternity tests done. There's been a lot of rumors surrounding who it might be. Her then fiance, Jesse Grund, is not the father. That was proven through the genetics. The person that died in the car accident may or may not even exist. So there wasn't anything done there biologically. She then later claimed that she was raped at a party. She doesn't know who the father is. And then later it's been supposed that it was a family member, such as her father or her brother, who parented, and both of them have been cleared through DNA and genetic testing. So, Katie, if you'd show pictures of little Kaylee with Casey and by herself. So this is the age in which she disappeared. This is that summer. Okay, so those are pretty well-known photos of her. There's not a lot online that haven't been shared over and over and over. I know that Casey sold pictures of her daughter to some newspapers or some magazines and made a bunch of money on those at one point during the course of the trial and the disappearance and the investigation and all that. I don't know exactly at what point she profited off of them, but she did make in the several six figures for selling some of those pictures. So it does feel a little grimy to share them, but they're out there. So that's what little Kaylee looked like when she disappeared. She was raised in the Orlando home of her grandparents, along with her mother. Her mom lived at home still when she was born, and for the entire nearly 3 years of her life, she lived there with Cindy and George. But the day after an alleged family argument on Father's Day, June 15th of that year, Casey left with her young daughter and refused efforts to reconcile with her father, her parents in person, and was gone for a total of 31 days, where they claim they did not see her or their granddaughter at all. Okay, so on July 15th, a month later, almost to the day after she left the house mad that day, Cindy reports Kaylee missing to 911. This happened after learning that the family car that was used by Casey had been impounded. George went and retrieved the car from impound and was overwhelmed by the smell that remained even after a bag of trash was removed from the trunk. Cindy tracked down her daughter later that day, and over a string of several 911 calls that day, I think 3 in total, reported that Kaylee had been missing for 31 days. She demanded Casey's arrest and notes the vehicle odor, saying it smells like there's been a dead body in the car. Cindy and Casey had given varied explanation as to Kaylee's whereabouts before finally telling her that she had not seen Kaylee herself for weeks. So what happens is the car is impounded. Because it's registered to the parents, they get the phone call, hey, your car's at impound. They had not seen their daughter or their granddaughter for a month. George goes and gets the car. There's trash in it. It smells horrible. He takes the trash out. It still smells horrible. That's going to come up later when we start talking about the case. But what Cindy ends up doing is calling 911 to say that their daughter had stolen their car and they wanted her arrested for vehicle theft. After that call, she got in an altercation again with her daughter. Where's our granddaughter? That kind of thing. They called 911 back, and I'm going to have you play the 911 call, Katie. This third 911 call that really got things moving is the one that is the most informative.
911, what's your emergency?
I called a little bit ago, the deputy sheriff. I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store. I need to find her.
Your daughter admitted that the baby is where?
But the babysitter took her months ago. My daughter's been looking for her. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. And she just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Kaylee, Caylee, Anthony.
Kaylee Anthony?
Yes.
How long has she been missing for?
I have not seen her since the 7th of June.
Is your daughter there?
Yes.
Can I speak with her?
Hey, Sheriff, they want to talk to you. Answer the question. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you tell me what's going on a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez.
Okay, so that cuts off there. There's a lot there. I want to stop and just talk about the 911 call for a second and kind of the circumstances here, Shawn. What are some things that sort of strike you about that phone call?
Well, you can tell that the grandmother, Cindy, is totally emotional, trying to figure out what's going on. She's only getting the information from her daughter. Obviously, in that moment, she's probably trying to figure it out and not really knowing, hey, she's lying, but it's just odd to hear some of the calmness in Casey's voice, and then hear the frantic idea. Also, one hour at the very beginning of almost of the call, or as she's telling the 911 operator what's going on, the grandmother, one of the things that struck me is she said she's been missing for 30 days. And then Anthony comes in and clarifies 31 days. And when did we say in that timeline that she had the fight?
Allegedly, it was actually allegedly July 15th or June 16th that she left. However, in that call, Cindy is saying that it was June 7th. So I don't know if she was a week off in her estimation of when they talked last or what, but there is a discrepancy in when they said they saw her last.
Yeah, but the reason I say that is, but you can kind of tell the grandmother is grasping for time in that phone call. 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony's 31 days. I mean, there's a definite number there that she has in her mind.
Yeah.
And as we go along with this, I think it's important to kind of think about, we don't know. People will say all kinds of things, but as I've personally worked alongside of some investigators on certain issues, and I've learned a little bit. And one of the very first things I learned is oftentimes the killers or the perpetrator will tell you exactly what happened, even though they're forming a story around it. They'll tell you what happened if you really listen to what
Yeah.
they're saying, and I think that's going to be key as we go forward.
Yep. In that, the first thing that strikes me is the desperation in Grandma's voice, and I can almost hear Casey rolling her eyes. I don't have anything to say to them. Like the snotty little girl response while her mom's freaking out over the loss of a 2-year-old, almost 3, is indicative of Casey as her character. Not only is she unfeeling towards what her mom is going through, but she's disrespectful and dismissive. And when she's forced to speak to the 911, you can almost hear that she tries to get a little bit of concern in her voice as she goes. And then just details start to roll out. She comes up with a name, which we find out later. The woman, there is a person by that name. It's, there's a person by that name, but that person never met them. That person had no association with them, but she just on the spot can come up with details that aren't even true. And so that struck me, especially as we go forward in the case. But she's a 22-year-old woman and a mother, and I had 2 children by the time I was 22. I was married at 20, and maybe I was pregnant with my second at 22. I just didn't have that childish teenage mentality then. I can't even imagine not having motherly, even being able to feign motherly instincts. To me, that just is really striking. Like I was a mother at that age, and it just doesn't resonate as truth for me that she would be that detached if there wasn't something really wrong with her. But that's my opinion.
We haven't really talked about this a whole lot on this particular case. We've talked about it on some other issues, and I can't go too much into detail here with one case I've worked with, and it was actually involved some people very close to me in my job. But there was a case that I worked very close, similar to this, and the young woman ended up killing her child, 6 months old, and she first said it was choked and so forth. Later, she finally confessed that she actually suffocated the child. But the reason I bring this up is because as I look at that young woman, I knew her personally, and as I listen to this case, I'm seeing so many things that the need to party, the need to have control over mom and dad, the rebellion. I mean, there's a lot of things as we go through this. I think that I can point out later on as we go through this, but I think right now it is so important to realize that we're not just blaming Anthony. There's other things as we go along that we're going to talk about, but it's just amazing to watch and listen to this case and to see the similarities of something that was very close and happened to me.
Another interesting thing as this goes along is in that phone call, Casey said, I talked to her today for about a minute, and now that phone number is disconnected. Like she's already
building.
wiping out the concern, right? The concern for the 31 days. No big deal. I talked to her today.
Right.
Oh, but also she was kidnapped by this lady. Those details wouldn't make sense. If I was kidnap a child, I wouldn't keep in touch with the mother for a month. So her story isn't making sense already from the get-go. But
I mean, well, and just very hate to interject, but if my mom had called 911, if I was there and it was my situation, and somebody had actually kidnapped my son or daughter, I would be on the phone with the police as I'm driving to find this person. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
I mean, it's like, hey, I'm going to give you all the information. If I find them, you're probably going to have a body bag. Okay.
yeah.
So, you know, uh, there's that action. I just don't see that in her other than what you just said. What I am seeing is a building of, okay, that 30 days is gone. I hadn't seen her. She's, so anyway, it's just,
But don't worry, I talked to her. Everything's going to be fine. I don't know where she's at, but whatever. Let's talk about that 31 days. So she wasn't at George and Cindy's house. She reportedly spent some time with her boyfriend at his house overnights. She spent some time at other people's houses on their couches and various things. Katie, if you put up, I have about 4 pictures that show her during that month from social media. This is, I don't know if this was during that time or not. This might have been earlier or later, but this is kind of indicative of who she is. I know there was some talk about Google searches for, what shot girls wear. She was really into that bar life and the party scene and the club scene and wanting to profit off of that scene, I guess, work in that. I guess her boyfriend might have owned a business where there was something like that, from what I understand. But she was wanting to live that life and be that girl. So go ahead with the next one. This one, she, Ohio State fan. She's very, I don't know, just that personality kind of out there, putting herself out there. You can kind of see in that picture. Need I say more? I think there's one more here this is a picture of her today, but the issue I wanted to show here is this Bella Vita tattoo she got during that 30 days. And that is, it means a beautiful life. So at some point when she left her parents' house in June to when her mom called 911, she had gotten this tattoo knowing her daughter had been kidnapped, was not with her. She got a beautiful life tattoo. So it just kind of shows her disconnection with reality. If her daughter truly had been kidnapped, I don't know that I would go get a beautiful life tattoo. I would not be in that frame of mind. But that plays a little bit into who she is and what her character and depth of character is.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so the police understandably were a little confused because there had been the 3 911 calls. The first one being really just about a vehicle theft. So there was somebody coming out to take a report on that when they got the call that maybe there was this child abduction. And so understandably, the police were already a little confused and not sure what direction to go when they got there. There had been conflicting reports about that. They finally did come to decide that, yes, this child is missing and we need to, that's more important than the fact that, their daughter had taken a car and it ended up in impound. On July 16th, the following day after the 911 call was made, Casey was arrested. During that time, she led investigators. You can show the arrest picture if you want. During that time, investigators went with Casey on a wild goose chase. The first was to the uninhabited apartment of the nanny that she made up the name of Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who had allegedly run off with Kaylee, according to the 911 call, on June 9th. And then to Universal Studios, where Casey had pretended to have a job for a long period of time. Her parents believed she had a job there. She told police that she worked there. She even took them to her office at Universal Studios. However, she didn't have a badge to get in. Her name wasn't on the employee database. The investigators convinced the Universal Studios security people to let them in because they kind of wanted to see how far Casey would take it. But literally, she's talking to people on the grounds of Universal Studios. Hey, how's it going? How's your daughter? Just making it up like as she went and walked down this corridor to take them to her office, of which, of course, she had no office. She did not work there, had not worked there. And it wasn't until she got to the dead end of that building, she turned around and kind of joked, "Oh, I really don't work here." So she was arrested, charged with child neglect and lying to investigators and interfering with criminal investigation. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah,
Shawn?
yeah, that's kind of a very interesting point, and I think kind of coming back to something as I was investigating this, and one of my points that I had marked out, and another actual investigator had pointed this out that I was listening to. She was used to. We see that she was used to making up stories to cover her other activity. Like, for example, um, some teenagers make up stories. Hey, I got a job here, or I've done this. I'm going to go to my friend's house this weekend, or I've got a job over here every Monday night. Well, every Monday night, the girl or guy gets gone. Mom and dad, hey, they're at work. Well, they're not really at work. They're out partying. They're out doing whatever they want to do.
Mhm.
And so she's used to using that cover as that point, but I don't think she was ever used, and here's my point, she was never used to anybody following that up.
Mhm.
In other words, mom and dad didn't go and check the job, they didn't go and check the high school. I mean, are we seeing a pattern now? And now the police are like, okay, let's go to your job, let's talk to people.
Mhm.
And she's like, oh, okay, well, let's go to Universal Studios. Also, Universal Studios, I know what a lot of people are going to think. I mean, we don't even have to mention it, but a lot of people are going to go there probably in their own mind about, ooh, this is the Disney connection, or whatever.
Right.
But I think it's very interesting that the cop dad is not following up any of these things beforehand. I think that's also interesting.
Well, let's talk about that. Um, I did not find any information as to why George quit the police department or the sheriff's department in Ohio, nor why, after quitting that and having kind of a failed attempt at politics in Ohio, he settled for a security job, which he wasn't even full time doing in Florida. It makes me wonder, is there something that happened where he was given the luxury of quitting instead of being fired? What do you think about that?
Well, unfortunately, as I've been around a lot of law enforcement and kind of been around those type of people for a long time, I can tell you that it sounds, and again, I don't know, but it sounds like he was caught doing something probably embarrassing to the police department. I can tell you what, I don't know what he did, but I can tell you what oftentimes uh, probably found with having an affair with someone on staff or somewhere else, um, or being drunk on the job or something like that. Police departments a lot of times will usually just say, "Hey, go. We won't press charges, but you just got to leave."
Mhm.
Stuff like
And we
that.
won't recommend you to other departments as they call on, check on you and whatnot.
Right. And then that failed attempt, politics, you know, actually I knew of a situation kind of similar in the sense that person was found out, they got kicked off the police force. He says, well, hey, that's fine. I'll go actually run for chief of police and get back in that way. And, it failed miserably because people around knew what was happening.
Right. Even
And
if
so,
it's not public,
right.
there's ways of,
Yeah. So
yeah,
again, something's going on there with the dad and again, we're not saying the dad caused the murder, but
right.
there may be some contributing factors to her personality that we may get into in a minute.
Hmm. Okay, so on July 22nd, just about 5, 6 days after this little adventure at Universal Studios, Casey is officially declared a person of interest at a bond hearing. The hearing introduces evidence that a cadaver dog has zeroed in on the odor of human decomposition in the car trunk in the Anthony's backyard, as well as Cindy's admission that they had all seen Kaylee after June 9th. Although Casey is being held on relatively minor charges, the judge's disturbed enough by the evidence and the young mother's seemingly indifferent behavior to set bail at $500,000. So the smell in the car when George picked it up was investigated by cadaver dogs. They definitely hit that there had been a dead body in that. And then also in the Anthony's backyard. I don't know that if we're going to get into this a little bit later, but there is also evidence. And I don't believe this person, I don't know if this person ended up testifying at trial. I know he was interviewed by the police, but their next door neighbor had testified, at least in an interview with the police, that she had come over to borrow a shovel because she wanted to dig out some bamboo roots in her backyard. And he had given it to her, and then he kind of checked on her and she wasn't digging out bamboo roots. And so didn't turn out that she ended up using the shovel and returned it. But sounds like if the cadaver dogs are genuine, in their hits, and, every dog is different, so we can only trust the police department. But the body of a dead person was in the backyard as well as in the trunk. So, of course, a dog can't say which person. It would just only hit on the smell. But that is kind of where we're at. And that's why the judge put her bond at $500,000 that day. Mm-hmm. About a month later, on August 20th, her bond is posted by California bounty hunter Leonard Padilla. And he paid it with the hope that Casey would lead them to Kaylee. So he thought if he bonds her out, maybe they can watch her and sort of see where she goes, and maybe she'll go back to wherever her daughter is. Then 10 days later, the bond was rescinded. That reversal came a day after Casey's arrest for allegedly stealing and cashing checks from a friend, with the angry crowds demonstrating outside Anthony's home contributing to the decision. Quote, "I came and gave it my best shot. She didn't want to talk to me. What else can I say?" Padilla says. So this California bounty hunter had come out, paid to get her out. Then that was rescinded because she was cashing bad checks. So a whole other crime. She was put back in jail for. So his attempt to get her to lead them to the body was unsuccessful. Anthony was again released after other parties combined to post the bond on September 5th, although she would return to jail by the end of that month. Okay, in October the 14th, actually of the same year, 2008, she was finally charged with first-degree murder. The unsealed indictment also charges her with aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. In response, Casey's lawyer, Jose Baez, says his client's action will become clearer at trial. Quote, "I sincerely believe that when we have finally spoken to everyone, and I mean everyone will sit back and say, now I understand, that explains it," end quote. So I want to talk about Jose Baez for just a second.
Well, can I enter because
Yeah.
we talked a little bit before the show, because I wanted to bring this point up, and it was about the mom's call before you get into the detective. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing, sometime, I'm not really sure when the mom calls, but she's been calling Anthony while she was in jail, whether it was before the all the bailouts, or the bonds outs and stuff. But sometimes she was calling, and there was one phone call, and I want to put two or three things together right here real quick. In one of those phone calls, she asked Aunt Casey, "Where is she?" Talking about the little girl. "Where is she? Do you know where she's at?" And she says, "She's close. She's close." And she's like, "Well, what do you mean close?" And then that was the end of the conversation. She hung up and left. At another conversation, if I'm not mistaken, there was another conversation with, I'm not sure if it was one of the bounty hunters or one of the detectives that were asking her something, and she blurted out, "She's close." I mean, just kind of like out of the blue, blurted out, "She's close." And what I want to try to put together here is, I believe the father and the mother realized, hey, and where all those charges came from, they probably was working with police officers behind the scenes. They had to call the police officers to get allow the dogs to come on property to search the car. So he was probably in the midst of, as a police officer, knowing, hey, something's going on, and he's probably talking to mom and saying, "Mom, wife, if these dogs hit," and I've been around an actual cadaver dog that actually hit on something one time, and it is pretty clear. I mean, they just sit, and when they smell, they act a certain way. They'll go around 2 or 3 times, and they sit. So when that happened, that probably solidified to at least the dad. If he didn't know what was going on, of course, she's going to tell a story later on that he did know what happened. But
Right.
if he didn't know what was going on, he does now.
Right.
And
yeah. Especially if he was in homicide, he would have seen that
yeah,
before. Yeah.
and he probably knew what that smell was, and at least, and also, I'm just going to throw this out as my observation. If he has been in homicide and he was part of the murder, I doubt if he'll allow the police on that property to search that car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
He would know how that would go.
yeah. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
no, we're not going to let them do that. So now we go into to the attorney. So
Well, and to your point there too, it sounds like her parents getting to the point where they're letting the police in, they're still believing their daughter, like, well, yeah, come search our place because we think this lady's kidnapped our granddaughter. Do whatever you got to do, clear the house and then go find her. So to me, that leads, there are a lot of parents that will protect their daughter. These people sound like people that would protect their daughter. They've already protected her pregnancy and her lack of graduation, her job at Universal and all this stuff. So I do think they believed her, and they were just hoping the police would come in, clear it, and then get on to finding their granddaughter. So that plays into me that they were not involved, because with the kind of people that they are, they would have, if they knew that she knew where Kaylee was and that she had killed her, they would not have behaved early on the way they did, in my opinion.
yeah,
Jose Baez is an American criminal defense lawyer. He's an author. He's really well known for representing high profile defendants like Casey Anthony. But before that, Aaron Hernandez, which was the professional football player accused of murder, Mark Nordlick, which was a embezzler, I guess, hedge fund kind of guy, big money, Harvey Weinstein. So Jose Baez is not cheap. I don't know what his hourly rate would be or how you would get him, but there's some money behind Casey's defense. And you can see here, this is a picture of him with her. He has a reputation for kind of being a little bit grimy in court. I mean, defense attorneys do what defense attorneys do, and I think there's a need for them, but some of them have a reputation for being a little more snaky than others. And I think Jose Baez has that reputation of being okay with bending facts and truth and accusing falsely innocent people as part of his tactic, and he gets paid really well for that. What are your thoughts about him?
well, I mean, I don't know if we're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that happens, but there was a lot of innuendo at the end of the trial that there was some inappropriate relationship between client and him. And it's also weird that she's also now living with one of the other attorneys or one of the other people that help her.
Yeah, I don't know if she lives with them now, but she did directly after everything blew over. She moved in with somebody from her defense team, and does work with them still, like professionally, gets paid, like she's on their staff. I'm not sure exactly what capacity, if she's some sort of phone answerer or whatever. I don't think she's like a professional, like she doesn't have a PI license or anything like that, but she's stayed connected to the defense team. And it wasn't Jose Baez, but one of the defense team she ended up moving in with. So it was definitely more than just I'm paying you to represent me. They really took her in. And so to me, that's a little weird. But
yeah, and I think from what I understand, he immediately, the attorney that you're talking about, he immediately started in this defense of, okay, dad abused her, programmed her, or not really. He didn't use those words, but he was using those vernaculars.
Mind controlled her.
Yeah, and
Brainwashed.
she is the product, and her lying. I watched him on Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil kind of grilled him, but it was one of those friendly grills, if you know what I mean. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, hey, okay, I'm gonna hit you, but you're gonna hit back, right? Okay. So when I watched that, you could tell that he was getting uncomfortable, but at the same time, he knew where the questions were going, and
Mhm.
he just stayed the line with the father caused this. The
Yeah.
father caused this. Well, it's like, okay, that's one opinion, but who was, you know, the one responsible, so
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so 10 days after she was charged with first degree murder, the forensic report from the examination of Casey's car was released. The reports note that a hair strand discovered in the trunk of her car is microscopically similar to those found on Kaylee's brush and showed, quote, characteristics of apparent decomposition, end quote. Root banding is the term that was used, in which the hair roots form a dark band after death, which was consistent with hair from a dead body. Additionally, an air sample from the trunk is found to contain chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. So they can take air samples. They found this hair that had the banding. There's been, and actually, that root banding is a legally allowed in court. It is not a questioned science. It's not the first time it's come up in a case. It's not junk science. It's not hearsay. It's always allowed in court if this happens. It's a scientifically accepted situation that the hair only gets this banding at the root when there is a dead body that this hair has been on. You don't get that any other way. So that's not challenged in our American court system at all, or our science community. However, Kaylee has a lot to say about that, and she tries to throw, a bunch of doubt into that. But Kaylee, not being a professional or even a high school graduate, doesn't have a lot of credibility, in my opinion. So her defamation conversation regarding the root banding doesn't carry a lot of weight. I guess I'm more interested in the forensics and what the scientists in the courts allow. So those were found in her trunk, and it was Kaylee's hair. It was matched to that. Okay, so I know that you've been involved in, some law enforcement stuff in some cases. Does the root banding thing carry much weight for you, or is that
oh
just
yeah, I
like,
mean it's not just scientifically accepted. I mean it's almost clearly. I heard one guy talk about it from the stand one time. In the way he put it, when he was asked by one of the attorneys, why is this accepted? He says, well, it's kind of like, and he used the idea of a woman being pregnant. She's either pregnant or she's not. I mean,
Mhm.
it's one of those facts that you can't go by. And like you said, when Casey starts trying to attack that, it really kind of shows that something's not going on in her mind where
Yeah,
she's like, hey, I gotta defend myself from that. Well, there's just
there isn't a defense.
no.
Yeah. So before we move on to the discovery of Kaylee, let's talk again about some of these phone calls, because you brought up the fact that she sort of slipped and said she's close.
Mhm.
One of the things that struck me, and we don't have clips of those calls. If somebody's really interested and hasn't heard these calls, you can find them anywhere. But the way that Casey talks to her parents in these calls, who are still just really interested in finding Kaylee, is, to me, so brazen. She's sitting in jail and she's demanding that they put money on her books, and she's talking like she is running the house still from jail, or trying to, and she's so disrespectful. She's extremely disrespectful to her mom and very loving and sort of manipulative toward her dad at various times. So later, for it to come out, like you mentioned, that her dad was her abuser, or her dad caused this or whatever, it doesn't fit with how she behaved from jail. So to me, it's just the girl doesn't know what the truth is, and she just plays whatever angles in front of her, and she doesn't give a thought to what she played yesterday or what she's going to play tomorrow. But she definitely seemed in those calls and in prior reports of, growing up and whatnot, that she was more of a daddy's girl and had more clashes with her mother.
Mhm.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting since you brought up those phone calls from jail. I thought I'd throw that out there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, again, just the idea that nobody, her mom and dad were accepting a lot of her lies, and they probably knew some of it was lies. They probably knew, that. Also, I know the situation where a daughter was growing up in the house, and um, she had run of the house, and yet, I mean, you would see them out in public, and she would tell mom where to sit, or dad where to sit, and they obeyed. And so when I listened to the calls, I kind of agree with you. That's exactly what I was hearing. I was hearing somebody who was manipulating other people. It did not sound like to me like she was afraid of dad. She definitely didn't seem like she's afraid of mom. So um, again, it's obvious.
Yeah. Okay, on December 11th, 2008, the skeletal remains of a young girl were discovered. The bones were found in a bag in a wooded area less than a half a mile from Anthony's home by a utility worker named Ray Kronk. It's later revealed that Kronk had sought to convince police to search that area back in the summer. So this guy, I want to say, I don't know, utility, I think electrical lines or something. He worked for the city. He'd been back there. He saw something earlier in the summer that made him think that looked like maybe a body, but he didn't go to it. Like he didn't go right up to it. I guess it was pretty swampy and not kind of a hospitable area. And so he just did what he thought was best and called the police, and nobody really followed up, or maybe they went out, but they didn't see what he was talking about. So later, then in December, he gets called back out there for his job, and he sees that what he had seen before is still there. And this time he goes up and opens, moves all the debris away and opens up the
Mhm.
um, little package of whatever was there. Turns out it's her blanket from her grandparents' house that she's wrapped in. And he finds human bones, and then he calls again. So they were found with a blanket inside a laundry bag in a wooded area near the house. Investigative reports and trial testimony varied between there being duct tape found near the front of the skull or on the mouth of the skull. So there's like a varying things, but either way, there was duct tape found on or near her head. So the medical examiner mentioned duct tape as the one reason that she determined the death to be homicide, while the cause of death was listed as death by undetermined means. So the decomposition was such that an actual cause of death could not be determined, but the manner was determined to be homicide because of the duct tape. On December 20th, just 11 days, well, less than, I guess, a little over a week later, the remains were confirmed to be those of Kaylee. The Orange County Chief Medical Examiner reports that the bones showed no evidence of trauma and that Kaylee's death is being ruled homicide of undetermined means. Although the skull is found with the duct tape around the nose, mouth, and jaw now, the advanced state of decomposition, like I said, keeps them from being able to tell the cause of death. So bones are not broken. Sounds like some may have been kind of missing. There was flooding in that area. I'm not sure what the wet season exactly is there, but they had been there for quite some time. Anyway, so what are your thoughts about just kind of that package? What about what you think about Ray, the utility worker? I know that at one point
Mhm.
he was investigated as potentially being the guy that took
Yeah.
her there and put her there.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to that little tidbit that we could go into. Um, I'm often wondering. We don't really know. Again, let's kind of be honest with this one little tidbit. We really don't know how she died, nor who actually killed her. That's the thing.
Right.
So, how she was found is, to me, kind of the important aspect of saying, okay, there was a laundry bag. She was wrapped. There was duct tape on the head. Um, and that duct tape could be several different things. I mean, it means several different things. It could have been used to keep her quiet, or part of wrapping the body with the plastic. So you don't really know how that's going to go. And I don't mean to be
Yeah.
morbid, but the reason I'm going down that trail is when I kind of think about this case in some of the other cases that I've seen with similar situations, oftentimes it's neglect. Maybe she was left in a hot car. Maybe she was left somewhere, came and they found her. Hey, this was, or maybe she was, somebody was enraged because they was in a fight with somebody and they struck her. We just don't know how she died. But I also believe, if I remember, there was a blanket there,
Mhm.
which means that, and another detective pointed this out, so it's not me. Um, Usually, when blankets are found, that means that the child was either in bedroom or preparing for bed. Now, it could be even in a car because I've seen people have their blankets in the car seat, and
Mhm.
when they transfer over from car to the house. So something there happened within that time period of that child being at a restful or at least some type of position of being near
Yeah.
bedtime.
I don't disagree. I will say, depending on the child, and I don't know if Kaylee
Mhm.
was this. I know my daughter was very attached to her blanket. My
Right.
boys couldn't care less about their
Mhm.
blanket. So if they were with a blanket, it would mean bedtime. If we were going on a long road trip, or
Mhm.
if there my daughter was going to be not in her comfort zone, I would bring her blanket, and
Mhm.
if we're going to be gone most of the day, I'd let her have it because I know she'd want to take a nap, at some
Right.
point or whatever. That was just for her a security thing. So if Kaylee was that, it doesn't surprise me that in the middle of the day grocery shopping, she might have her blanket sitting in the car.
Right.
But it does mean that if the blanket was left with her, to me, if I was a random stranger, I wouldn't care if the child had their blanket. If I
Right.
was the mother or a family member, I would sort of just scoop up my kid with the blanket as though they're kind of the same, they're like part of the
Mhm.
same package. So the fact that she was with her blanket and that it was a blanket that came from her bedroom at her grandparents' house, to me says that it was either subconsciously a part of who she was, and the person that put her there knew that that belonged with her, or like you said, it was part of how they removed her from the house or whatever it might have
Maybe
been.
some type of evidence was on that blanket, possibly,
Yeah,
blood or whatever.
yeah. I think, in the case of, if you're going to make up a story that Zanny the nanny took her, um, you, it wouldn't make sense to have her blanket still sitting in your car, because if she had been at the nanny, you would think you would leave it with the nanny with her. So,
Yeah. Now let me ask you a question on that. When you said Zanny the nanny, did she actually call the nanny that?
mhm,
I
she
mean,
did.
yeah.
She did. So she called her Zanelda as her name, but then she referred to her as Zanny as the
So
nickname.
I wonder, did they find drugs or anything in could they do that? I mean,
They only had bones, so there wasn't anything to be able to test
I'm just
for
wondering if
drugs.
Zanny the nanny was kind of like Xanax,
Yeah, that's definitely been
kind of
presented
talked
as one
about.
of the things where maybe, party mom would give her daughter a little bit of Xanax to put her to sleep and maybe overdose her, and she didn't wake up. And so that I wasn't that kind of mom. So I wasn't part of the party crowd, but I do know that often teenage moms or young moms kind of joke about um, giving their kid a
Mhm.
little something to be the nanny while they go do whatever. Like, put the kids in bed and then even the TV can be the nanny, right? Like there's distract your kid or kind
Right.
of get them kind of off you so you can go do what you want. So yes, Zanny the nanny has been presented as potentially Xanax, or some kind of medication to make her daughter fall asleep. Um, so that could weigh into why she chose that name. Um, back in that 911 call, which is when she first made up that name. But
Mm.
okay, so after the remains were confirmed to be those of Kaylee in December, end of December, a month later, almost to the day, and George was taken into custody after a suicide attempt. He was reported to be despondent and possibly under the influence of medication and alcohol when he was located at a Daytona Beach, Florida hotel, along with a 5-page suicide note. So there's not a lot that's talked about that suicide attempt. I don't know what that note said, but clearly the entire situation of the missing grandchild, the daughter's arrest, has affected the parents. And so regardless of whether or not George is involved, I can see a world in which George is completely innocent and despairing, but I can see a world in which George is complicit and fearful. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it could be both and or. I mean, it's so difficult to know. I mean, you're looking at a guy who homicide detective or ex-homicide detective, um, multiple marriages, probably feel like a failure at some point, especially if his daughter's going rogue and just messing up all the time. And now the death of a young girl. I could see where that would just take somebody over the edge and really they would be despondent. And then on the other side of that, there could be some guilty feelings too. Maybe he was, I mean, even if he didn't do anything to the child, but he may have felt responsible. Yeah, I didn't raise my daughter right. I
Yeah.
had failed marriages. I had this and I drunk a
Yeah.
lot or whatever.
Yeah.
And that played into it.
There was some talk too, that the family disagreement on Father's Day was another, and it had happened at other times too, reportedly or allegedly, that Cindy had threatened Casey with taking custody over, like filing unfit parent, and that she and George would legally get guardianship of Kaylee. And so because that had been threatened more than once, I wonder if the coulda, shoulda, woulda, if only we had, plays a role in some of the feelings of guilt or,
I think you can definitely see some tension between the husband and wife in some of these interviews. And some will say, well, it's tension maybe of guilt and all this. But again, there's situations like you just said, maybe she's blaming him behind the scenes. If you would have just done what I asked you to do to begin with, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah. And it may be that George was defending Casey,
Yeah.
saying she'll figure it out. We just got to support her, and so
Right.
who knows what happens in a marriage, especially one with this kind of stress. And
Yeah.
it sounds like long-term stress. It sounds like they never really had very much control over their children. I'm guessing for a person in their 22nd year of life to be behaving this way, she was probably calling the shots when she was 2 and not being shown the boundaries. So they don't come across like a set of parents that really knew how to handle the hard stuff. And so regardless of whether or not they themselves are depraved, there's just a lot of their action or inaction that did play a role into what ended up happening. Not blaming them for it. I'm just saying, as a parent, I can look back and wish I had done things differently too. And I can see how, in my 40s, my mind is much healthier than it was when I was in my 20s. And I could have avoided a lot of pain, both for myself and my children. And so you can see why that would create despair in a person, specifically with George and his 5-page suicide attempt. And that letter did not reportedly have any kind of confession or any kind of, I'm sure if it had that kind of significance, that would have been absolutely available to the public. But because it didn't, I don't believe that they're hiding any kind of critical information from that. It just sounds like somebody in despair. Okay, April 13th. So 4 months later, in 2009, prosecutors announced their intention to pursue the death penalty. Although earlier court papers indicated that it would not be in play, the new notice of intent cites sufficient aggravating circumstances to justify that position. And then in October of that year, 6 months later, the officials released 700 pages of documents related to the Anthony investigation, including records of Google searches of the terms neck breaking and how to make chloroform on the computer accessible to Casey, presented by the prosecutors as evidence of a crime. Among photos that were also entered into evidence was one from the computer of Ricardo Morales, an ex-boyfriend of Casey, depicting a man leaning over a woman with a rag captioned "Win her over with chloroform." So the chloroform conversation actually ended up becoming a pretty key part of the trial. There were allegedly, and we're going to get to this, allegedly 84 searches for how to make chloroform on the computer. And then we'll get into it later, it turns out that the forensic person that was looking at the computer wasn't doing the forensics right, and it turns out not to be that many. But either way, the family computer had chloroform Googled, undeniably. What are your thoughts about that? And net breaking also being on there.
Well, in another case that we know of, I know of, as I was talking to this young person, this young lady, it was clear she'd already talked to the detectives. She kind of said the same thing to them. She said, "I woke up and I knew today was the day I could do what I needed to do." And so it kind of showed some, and that's what convicted her for long term. And I kind of see that kind of playing out here, searching on how to deal with the problem of I can't go party. How can I do what I need to do and where I can do it? It's kind of, but yet sometimes searches, um, you know,
Our
again,
Google searches when we're looking into these crimes might not be so.
yeah, I mean, if you come and search, and I would say this, if you come and look at my computer right now, you probably find all kinds of cult stuff,
The witchcraft stuff. Yeah.
witchcraft, cult stuff. Hey, what does owls mean? Okay, well,
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
this guy, man, he's into owls, but
Which, by the way, your owl show last week was amazing. If you haven't seen Shawn's talk on owls last Saturday, go check it out.
well, thank you. I didn't think I did too good of a job, but anyway, I just looking back at this case, it's just again just checking off a lot of the boxes. There's a lot of the cases that I've dealt with, or some of the cases I've dealt with, exactly showing that pattern of, hey, I can. When she said I can do it, I had a chill. I mean, I have never heard anybody speak like that before, and she just said I knew I could do it. I mean, it was plain. She said it plain. It wasn't coerced or nothing. She just said, I know I could do it. And I was like, wow, that's just strange. So,
yeah. Okay, so May 24th, 2011, the trial started with the defense's bombshell claims, but the trial began with the prosecution presenting, Casey as the party girl with no use for a young daughter, as evidenced by the month of shopping and drinking during Kaylee's absence, not to mention the tattoos and whatnot. There's also, this concept of not just, I can do what I want, but I also want my parents to hurt because I'm mad at them. So there's a couple things going on there. She's been using them for the whole time Kaylee's been alive to go out and party and pretend she's going to work and just let, them take care of her. But now that she's mad at them, she wants them to hurt, and her only power is her daughter. And so if she can keep her daughter from her parents, she can hurt them, but then she still has this problem of, well, this is responsibility and I don't want that. So she does have to look for another solution. And I believe that's part of what we're seeing in some of this search. However, the Jose Baez's defense opening statements were asserting that Kaylee drowned in the family swimming pool and that George sought to cover up the accidental death. The lead defense lawyer also alleges that George had molested Casey, thereby igniting her habit of lying to cover up the pain, that Kronk, the utility worker, had found Kaylee's body planted in the woods. Taking the stand as the first witness, George denied that he ever molested his daughter or knew anything about Kaylee's drowning. So you hear the prosecution hitting Casey with the truth that she's an irresponsible 22-year-old. Like there's no getting around that, in my opinion, allegedly. However, they immediately from the opening accused George of first having, okay, this accidental, she drowned in the pool. My dad was home and he said, let me handle it. And he covered up the crime. And oh, by the way, he also molested me. So I had to lie because I'm just used to lying because I'm afraid of him. Do those things seem to fit together? I mean, somehow Jose made it fit.
Yeah, I don't think they fit. But again, here's the thing with lawyers on both sides, even the prosecution, is they have a job to sell their story. And if they can get anybody on the jury, anybody at the judge to say, okay, well, yeah, I guess that could be possible, then they've done their job. Mm-hmm. So he can probably try to spin it any way he wants to. But again, like you just said, drown in a pool, but then it's daddy's fault.
Yeah.
How did she drown in a pool?
Well, 3 days after the trial had opened on May 27th, the witness offered his theory about the smell in Casey's car. Simon Birch was the manager of the towing company that had impounded her car in June of 2008. And he testified that he had encountered multiple vehicles with dead bodies during his 3 decades in the business, and that the smell from Casey's car was consistent with those past experiences. The same day, the fiance of Casey's brother, Lee, also took the stand and described the very special bond that she observed between Kaylee and her mother. So now we have, again, opposing kind of schools of thought trying to get the jury on your side, right? We have the prosecution calling Simon Birch to say, hey, I've smelled death in cars before, and that this is definitely that category. Plus we have the forensic report that there was decomposition smell in the air samples of the car. But then we have the soon-to-be sister-in-law of Casey saying Casey was this really great mom and she was really attached to her daughter. Her daughter was really attached to her, which, okay, it's not hard for a 2-year-old to love their mother, even if their mother's horrible. They have no frame of reference for what is normal. So you just have a natural bond and you need your mother. And even if you're afraid of your mom at 2, you don't know that you don't really know what that means because you still love her, right? What do you think about those that day in court?
Well, I mean, obviously you can get, court is one of those things. You can get 5 different witnesses and 3 of them will say one thing and 2 of them will be opposite. And yet, how many times we see a shooting happen. Oh, man, he was the greatest guy you ever know. They get his neighbor, hey, he fixed my car, man. He did this or he did that. And so character witness is, kind of one of those things to where it's like, okay, if you brought 100 people in and polled them and said, do you like this guy? Yeah, we liked the guy. He was a pretty cool guy.
Yeah. There's a lot of really likable serial killers out there.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, but, so character witness is really, and I think a lot of times judges and even some of the jury will kind of understand that, they're looking at who can I believe, so.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of comes like from a spiritual perspective, this comes back to discerning the fruit of the genuine spirit or the fruit of the imposter antichrist spirit, because like we talked about, is this person nice or is this person kind? And that a lot of times a jury doesn't even have the background to know how to discern what's being said, because there's a lot of really nice things that can be done that come from the overflow of a wicked heart. So character witness only goes so far as the person discerning what's really being said, and that discernment, it's deeper than just what whoever is being winsome.
Kind of on that same point, I mean, kind of one of the reasons why again we do this show is to kind of give you discernment. And one of the things that we might want to talk about right here, be a good place, is people close to the family, close to her, friends. Was it friends that were out there partying with her? Was it people who say, hey, because in the case that I was talking about with mine, she had friends that was telling her she needed to quit partying. She had friends that were, family was saying, "Hey, you need to get a job. You need to go do this," and that added more pressure to her. But at the same time, there were people noticing that something was going on.
Mhm.
Now, if she was just partying and the kid wasn't around or child wasn't around, um, that too should be kind of discerned. When you're watching people, or how they dealing with their kids. Are their kids around? Are they loving their kids? Or have they made the transition from party diva to mom? I
Mother.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
those are some things that, and if you're, and by the way, if you're watching somebody in your own life and you're seeing that transpire, the first thing I would say to you is help them to de escalate feeling like a bad mom, but help them. And most of all, look at that child, bring that child to safety. Look after the child yourself. I mean, if there's nothing there, talk with the family. See, don't like try to be nosy, but just say, hey, is there something I can do to her, to the mother or to the
Mhm.
parents? It's not just the mom. I've seen situations where there's been dads and moms and the kids, they're over here getting drunk and the kids is over here running rampant. I mean,
Mhm.
they're just out there,
Yeah.
you know, help the people make that transition to mom and dad and realize that partying is not the way to go.
Yeah. Yep. Well, on June 6th, we had some forensic expert testimony, which was then contradicted by the other side with an FBI scientist talking about the shockingly high amount of chloroform found in the trunk of the car with that air sample. So you had one lab saying there's a shockingly high amount of chloroform, which makes the chloroform search sort of relevant. But then the next day, an FBI scientist said that marker can be found in lab tests with cleaning supplies, and we know that she had cleaned her car because she was trying to get rid of whatever smell that was in there. So it seems like, who are you going to believe when you're talking to two scientists? This is not unusual in
Right.
court cases. Everybody's paying for an opinion.
Right.
Those people are not testifying out of the kindness of their heart. They're being paid to say whatever side they're working for in general. And I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying they're being paid to see a thing in a certain way and to present it, the
Right.
science, the way that they want to present it. The next day, or a couple days later, on June 8th, the jury pondered the relevance of the search engine. So, like I said before, chloroform was testified by a software designer to have said to have been searched 84 times. And also, someone looked up terms such as head injuries, ruptured spleen, chest trauma, and internal bleeding on the Anthony home computer in March during the regular hours of work for George and Cindy. So these searches are not happening in the evening, like where Cindy's a nurse and she might be looking up something for work. This was happening while she was at work. So this is what the software designer was testifying. Later, the designer reported that there was an error in his detecting software and determined that the user had visited the site related to chloroform only once. So, okay, well then was he wrong about the hours those things were searched? So, prosecution witness John Dennis Bradley's software developed for computer investigations was used by the prosecution to indicate that Casey had conducted extensive computer searches on the word chloroform 84 times, and then later he recanted that, saying he made a mistake. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? I mean,
Well, it's so unfortunate. And again, if it's one search, I mean, okay, I don't know. I guess I would be like the jury. I guess they ultimately found out, took that and threw it out, didn't they?
well, on June 23rd, Cindy refuted previous testimony. So, in a crucial day for the defense, Cindy claimed that she was the one who had searched chloroform on her own computer. She testified that a stain found in the trunk, which allegedly was caused by Kaylee's decomposing body, was there when the family purchased the car 8 years earlier. So what's happening is she's coming up with an explanation, and she didn't say she searched chloroform. She said she searched chlorophyll, and chloroform came up, and she clicked it accidentally. So she's searching something to do with her plants that she's working on.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the time of when those searches happened was testified to have come, while she was at work and while Casey would have been the only one at home. But now her mom is taking her defense, and so it gets really convoluted. And I guess this is the point of, justice system in the United States. And this is why we're searching for justice, because what ends up happening is there is reasonable doubt here. But I want to talk about this reasonable doubt, the weirdness that's happening, from one person to the next person, and the mom saying one thing and then suddenly defending her daughter, and, them believing that their daughter's a liar and then them defending her as though she's a truth teller. There's something spiritually happening here. This is a spirit of confusion, in my opinion.
Right.
Whether there's some ritual being spoken over this trial, or there's, people involved in higher up grimy stuff, I could never say. I don't know. It makes me wonder, because my conspiracy mind thinks, wow, there's just too much. There's too much against Casey for her to have, as we know, not been found not guilty. But the duplicitousness of her parents, the duplicitousness of the scientific information as it's being relayed, one guy saying one thing and then the very same guy later recanting what he said, to me is just a spirit of confusion. What do you think in terms of the spiritual perspective of the facts?
Yeah, something I thought about and I wrote down here when I went through the last couple of days was the fact that even if there was some multiplicity going on with her personality, it seemed like there was also some stuff going on with the parents. And it was like, okay, like you said, she's wondering what her daughter done to her child, her granddaughter. Well, there seems like there's more power coming against, like I said a while ago, like that Casey was actually running the parents, and yet the parents are kind of like, I don't know, programmed to protect her as well. Yeah. So you don't really know. Again, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I've heard some really off the wall stuff, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I think what you're saying about the confusion, the duality, the control, the sin nature, the allowing your sin nature to go unchecked in so many ways on this issue. And there's also one thing about talking about justice, searching for justice. What is it? Let me look at this scripture, make sure. Numbers 32:23. But if you do not do so, take note that your sin, that you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure that your sin will find you out. Mm-hmm. We look at as you said, as our justice system, and it's not really made to. In fact, we talked about this yesterday here at the church. A lot of things in our justice system is not made for justice. It's just made for whoever has the most money.
Yeah.
And that's the sad reality. But I think another thing here with that spirituality, and I'll kind of pass it back to you after this, is we talked about this over and over and over again. There's no seeking the Lord in the family whatsoever. There's no seeking Christ. There's no seeking holiness. There's no cohesiveness in that confusion to at least seek the Lord and seek God in any of this situation that I can see.
Not only is there not a seeking of Christ, there's just not a foundational operation of the family. Like, this is how our family operates. I know good families who do not have a relationship with Jesus, who do not have a spiritual or even a religious background, but they still have fundamental values in their family that require that people tell the truth, and that require that you not steal, and that, like, there's just a fundamental moral compass that really is based in biblical principles, but it's just good operating in family. Like, this our family can operate if we're not tearing each other to shreds. But this particular family does not seem to have even the most basic rules for surviving in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
go ahead.
one quick thing. I've been a part of some of the programs here in our community, and some of the um, system will call upon me every once in a while and to do some parenting classes and pastoral kind of things with people that's not even in the church or not even Christian. And one of the things I try to do with couples, even if they don't know Christ, is say, look, you got to love each other. You've got to be able to have some foundations, and I share Christ with them. And that's all we can do is as a community is help other people come back to that point of saying you need Jesus. And I know that sounds like
Yeah.
a you need Jesus moment, but you need Yeshua to come in and help bring something out of this confusion. So, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Some order out of chaos, right?
yeah, right.
So, Katie, if you would put up that picture I have of Casey sitting at the defense table in court, I'm going to read to you. This is kind of her. I don't know, I don't know who she was motioning to, but she just seems disrespectful. I don't know. I can't imagine sitting in trial, making
Mm,
weird faces at people. And I don't know. To me, it's just, I
yeah.
think she just had a little disrespect on her the whole time. But on July 3rd, 2011, the two sides presented their closing arguments. Continuing with the narrative that Casey was overly burdened by Kaylee, lead prosecutor Jeff Ashton emphasized to the jury how the young mother was motivated enough to go to extremes to achieve her freedom. Quote, something needed to be sacrificed. That something was either the life she wanted or the life thrust upon her, end quote. He said, actually, quote again, she chose to sacrifice the child, is what Jeff says. So I find that wording interesting. While forbidden to revisit the unsupported molestation claims, Baez nevertheless delivered an effective closing argument by pointing out the lack of evidence that could definitively place Kaylee's body in the car trunk or tie Casey to her daughter's death. So apparently the root banded hair that was in her trunk, he was just going to ignore that, and he somehow was able to make an emotional plea that there was no proof. On July 5th, Casey is found not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child, but guilty of 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement officer. Counts 4 through 7 for providing false information to law enforcement were: Anthony said she was employed at Universal Studios during 2008 pursuant to the investigation of missing persons report. Also, Anthony said she had left Kaylee in an apartment complex with a babysitter, causing law enforcement to pursue a missing babysitter. Also, Anthony said she informed 2 employees of Universal Studios, Jeff Hopkins and Juliette Lewis, at Universal of the disappearance of Kaylee, but neither of those people existed, or at least not at Universal Studios. They don't exist. Count 7, Anthony said that she had received a phone call and spoke to Kaylee on July 15th, 2008, causing law enforcement to expend further resources. So she was found guilty of those 4 misdemeanors and not guilty of the more serious crimes of manslaughter and aggravated first-degree murder and also aggravated child abuse. After almost 6 weeks of testimony, 400 separate pieces of evidence presented in court, the jury of 7 women and 5 men took less than 11 hours to reach the verdict. The not guilty murder verdict was met with public outrage and was both attacked and defended by media and legal commentators. Some complained the jury misunderstood the meaning of reasonable doubt, while others said the prosecution relied too heavily on the defendant's alleged poor moral character, since she had been unable to show conclusively how the victim had died. Time magazine described the case as a, quote, social media trial of the century. On July 7th, 2011, Casey is sentenced to the time already served. She received a 4-year sentence and a $4,000 fine for the 4 counts of lying to police, but prison time is canceled out by the near 3 years already spent behind bars and credit for good behavior. 10 days later, on the 17th, she's released from jail with credit for time served. She exited shortly after midnight, passing approximately 100 protesters who showed up to demand justice for Kaylee. Quote, it is my hope that Casey Anthony can receive the counseling and treatment she needs to move forward with the rest of her life, her lawyer says in a statement. On January 25th, 2013, a year and a half later, a Florida appellate court overturned the 2 of the misdemeanor convictions, so they're not even on her record as a conviction anymore. Shawn, what are your thoughts regarding the closing arguments, the way the jury came out with that, and then what happened with her jail time and the overturn of 2 of the misdemeanors?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's amazing to me that you can't sit down and say that the police didn't do their job and the prosecution didn't do their job. But then again, you have to sit down and say that there was reasonable doubt. Again, they didn't really show a lot of evidence. We know she's a liar. We know she's this. We know she's that. She's claiming sexual abuse. She's claiming this. But again, there's no real, okay, we got evidence that the child has been killed. We we have that evidence, but again, so how do you proceed with that as a juror? If you were on that jury and you're privy to all the information, do you look at it? And apparently they didn't. They didn't see that there was enough evidence to do that. Now, my thoughts on it, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay, but I do believe that there's some spiritual things happening in the background that make me feel like there's something off about this whole case. And I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with that. Um, I think that if I was a prosecutor, if I looked at that case, I wouldn't even took it to trial. I mean, without really some concrete evidence or some circumstantial evidence, here's how the body got here. There's no talk of that. There's no talk about how the body got to the place, how it got out of the car, who moved it, where was the car found. It was just car was searched, dead body was there. That was it. So, is there more to this case? I don't know if we'll ever know.
I don't know that we'll ever know in this earth. Okay, so the reason I wanted to bring this up, and Katie, you can show the most recent picture again of Casey. This is her, a clip from her 3-part docuseries that she released last month in December of 2022. This is just what she looks like now. She still claims not to know what happened to her daughter. Theories like Zanny the nanny drowning in the pool, her father killed her, are continuing to be promoted even in this. Again, she really hammered home in this docuseries that she's the victim of this whole situation. Her dad, not only was a perpetrator against her, but now she's claiming he was abusing Kaylee. While she admits that she's a convicted liar, she still claims to be the victim in her daughter's death. I saw a few clips from this. I did not pay to watch it. I'm not going to pay to watch it. I don't think she needs to profit off this story anymore. But she doesn't take some of the facts and evidence, such as the root banding on the hair, where that's a scientifically provable thing. She kind of dismisses those things as like junior high gossip kind of stuff. So she takes the trial. She doesn't really address any of the real issues with the trial. Even in the 3-part docuseries, she sort of contradicts her own self from one part to another. She's still not telling the truth. She has not grown up, in my opinion. There is no significant spiritual change. She did work up a few tears when she talked about how her life has been so hard. She didn't have very many tears when she talks about missing her daughter or being a mother or any of that. It's just more, it's not fair that I've been, treated this way by the media and by people's opinion. And to me, I think the reason I brought it up is we are, Kaylee would be 17-ish right now. We are in her whole peer group is now coming into adulthood and starting to understand that this case even exists in our history of this country, and are
Mm.
not aware of the details that we're all aware of from 2005, 2008, 2011. So what they have now is this gossipy 3-part docuseries where this woman gets up and talks about being a victim and can turn on some tears, and it's well filmed, and all the emotional music playing and everything. And I personally have seen on my social media feed people who clearly aren't familiar with the story, who have only seen the docuseries and feel bad for her, and oh my goodness, her dad must be so awful. And while I can see, because of what I do and understanding SRA and some of the programming locations being Florida, Orlando specifically, and various places in Ohio, 2 of several in our country, I wonder if there's more to that from the mind control, possible, splitting of a person through complex trauma, childhood, sexual abuse, and that kind of thing. I don't see the evidence of that in Casey when she talks. I don't see switching in her. I just see a manipulator. So I can't go so far as to say that that's what I'm looking at, because I don't see that evidence. Whether she's that or not, I wouldn't know based on what I can see. But my concern is the whole generation of people who are being moved by a manipulator emotionally to a position, and history is being revised through this media sensation. That's why I suggested to you a few weeks ago that we talk about this case, because I don't want to be moved. I'm a generation or 2 behind various historic events, whether they're crime or war stories or whatever they may be. How can we discern, and how can we help our young people discern, and then generations that come after us, when there is an attempt to revise history?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just in this kind of case either. I mean, they're revising history from government to religion to everything is being changed and rerouted. Darkness really loves to do that. You take some of these companies that's been involved with a lot of bad things. They broke the law. They'll change their name, change some of their product, and then 2 years down the road, they'll come out just as strong as they was before.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with darkness. To discern that is, first of all, I think you have to be aware. You have to be willing to look and take. One of the things I really like about being in a position I'm in right now is talking to different people and getting different perspectives about things. Just because I talk to somebody in a different religion or a different thought doesn't mean I have to accept everything either. But I'm listening and pulling it all in and realizing, hey, there's things that's changing in their story, or there's things that's changing here. To do research, I'm amazed at how many even Christians who don't research a whole lot about something. They'll just accept whatever the media is telling them, whether it's their media, their brand of media that's telling them,
Right.
or their opposition. They don't want to hear the opposition. Just being more than just open-minded, be inquisitive and really think about discernment. Some of that discernment comes from digging and having seat time in something and looking and comparing.
And listening without assuming, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Shawn, is there going to be justice to be found for Kaylee Anthony?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Kaylee knows what happened. God knows what happens. And sometimes people will say, well, you Christians will just say, well, God's going to take care of it. Absolutely. There's coming a time to where we're all going to stand before the great judge. He's the judge of the universe. And we will give an account of our works, of our belief, of our actions. Everything that we have ever been a part of and done is going to be open before him, and we're going to stand before him. And that's the thing that we have to put our hope in. As a Christian, we can look at this and say, man, the the justice system is not what it is, and we can absolutely see that it's not what it is. It didn't bring justice in this case, but justice will be served. I think about Psalm 82, and I'm reminded of that because of this past week. People talking about Mike Heiser and his situation, but Mike was my instructor, and I never will forget the time that Mike starts talking about how God brings justice. Psalm 82, where he's talking to the divine council, and he says, you're supposed to defend the weak. You're supposed to be bringing and letting justice run down. The book of Amos talks about letting the justice run down as a stream, as water. And so justice will be served at some point. Truth will come out. And we sometimes hope and pray that it comes out in this lifetime and on this side of eternity. And it very well could be. I mean, there may be something that breaks loose in this case. I was actually listening to a detective, and they're thinking that there may be a long shot that something may come up with what I talked about a while ago, the idea of, why did not the prosecution talk about how the body was moved? There's a big question why that prosecution did not ask that question. And some of them are looking into that now. I can't remember the detective's name, but they were close on that case, and they're saying they're looking at it. But justice will be served.
So Casey can't be taken back to court in our system because she was declared not guilty. She says she was declared innocent, which is not the same thing, by the way.
Right.
But if there were other people involved, other people could be facing justice, the justice system here or in Florida. I believe also that there's justice for the skeevy tactics of a defense attorney or of a prosecutor or a detective, the lies of, people who defended her character or whatever it may have been, any lie, any breaking of God's commands, any darkness that was in any of the people involved in this case will face their justice. It's not just going to be whoever, hid her body in that spot. So I agree, Shawn. I don't have anything left on this. I could talk a long time about this case, but I don't have anything left for today's show. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up another week on Through the Black?
Well, just everybody, thank you for watching us. We go through these cases just to talk about it and show some discernment. But at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that when you think about these things, you pray for the families, you pray for God to expose, even if it's exposing the tactics, like you just said, Colleen, exposing the tactics. And I think what those detectives were talking about when they looking at this case again is to see that there's other things that were happening inside of the dynamic of that case, and they're looking to maybe even bring charges. And that's what I've heard on the rumor mill. So who knows what that's
who knows what's right.
But at the end of the day, folks, we want to make sure that you just know Jesus Christ, love your family, love your daughters. If you're seeing something in your daughter and your son, maybe it's drugs and alcohol, reach out for help. Don't try to solve it yourself. There is some help out there. Call on to God, call on to people to get you some help. Let people know. Don't hide it. Let people know. Get some help.
So, Shawn, we have one more week in this little season, this little 5-week season. We do not have another true crime discernment show until after the conference, actually. So this is the last one for the season. We're not going to be doing it in the next 5-week session, but we will all be back next week. Next Saturday, you'll be doing the Supernatural Saturday. We're going to have all the regular shows. My show, The Reclamation Project, will be on Thursday next week. Tom and Vicky on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to gear up again for another little session just prior to the conference. If you have not heard of the conference, you can check it out on throughtheblack.com. It is Out of the Darkness, Shawn and I will be there. Tom and Vicky Joy will be there. And then some. There's going to be other speakers as well. It's not too late to get your tickets. I do think prices will be going up as we get closer to the conference. So there's still a chance to get them at a reduced rate through that. If any of you need any support for any of the things that we've talked about on this show or others, you can email us at throughtheblack.connect@outlook.com. You can go through the website or just directly to that. You can reach out and just say, hey, I want to talk to Shawn or Colleen or somebody, anybody. And then our intake people will get that information to us. But for now, we're out. Have a good night.
Hey guys, what's going on? Tom Dunn here from Through the Black. And I want to invite you to go check out the website, resistandrescue.com. Resist and Rescue is the campaign that we started at the beginning of last year, and we really kept it rolling coming into this year, just asking everyone to join us in prayer. Prayer mapping your city, prayer mapping your state. To pray for the whole world for one person is kind of overwhelming, and I don't have that kind of faith every day. But if I pray for my city and you pray for your city, your state, and we just target local areas like hospitals, like schools, and just asking God to intervene and praying for churches and asking God to raise up powerful preachers and powerful leaders in our area. We can pray for just kind of the localized needs that we know about. Guys, we want you just to go to resistandrescue.com, get signed up, get your name put on the map. When you go there, you'll see a map, and you'll see all the people that have already signed up and gotten involved, and they're saying, hey, I'm going to be here in this city, in this state, in this country, praying. We want you to do exactly that, to pray, not only just to put your name on the map, but actually intercede and pray for your area, for your city, for your political leaders, whatever the need is. You know more about it than we do. So we hope you check that out. resistandrescue.com. All the information is there, and we want you to get involved. Thanks a lot, guys.